Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Does that sound good? Thank you, Bruce. You obviously can hear me. Okay, this afternoon's first session after lunch, as always, is a bit of a challenge. So the challenge here is to keep you all awake and interested and animated. So the topic is New Zealand Internet Governance, and I think some of you were in the room for the Internet Governance 101 session. This is a bit of a continuation of that, but actually looking at a multi-stakeholder model actually working and in progress. So by way of introduction, my name's Keith Davidson. I'm the International Director for Internet NZ, and in undertaking that role, I sit on a number of international organisation boards like APTLD, the Asia Pacific Top Level Domain Association. I'm the Vice Chair. I'm appointed to the ISOC board from August, Vice Chair of ICANN's CCNSO. You'll see a few up there. I've had a bit of interest in the whole internet governance arena, and I'm a former ISP owner and operator here in New Zealand. So I think I know a little bit about the subject, but not a lot. So I'll try and impart some knowledge to you today. We'll have a look at .nz specifically. Originally the .nz delegation, the CCTLD.nz, was delegated to John Hulka at Waikato University on the 19th of January 1987. In 1995, there were about 500 names, I think, in .nz, and Waikato University felt that that was like too much. There's too much effort, and some weeks there'd be 2 names being registered, so at that point ISOC NZ was being formed, the Internet Society of New Zealand, which was formed basically aligning itself to ISOC's principles of the internet everywhere for everyone and so on. ISOC NZ was redelegated the .nz domain name in 1995, happily, with Waikato University saying, yes, this is going to commercialise, it's going to get much busier. And just incidentally, ISOC NZ is still the same society today, but it changed its name to Internet NZ Incorporated. Internet NZ as an organisation, it's an open membership, not-for-profit, charitable society, and it has its vision of keeping the internet open and uncapturable and aims to protect and promote the internet for New Zealand. It has 2 arms or 2 subsidiary parts to its structure. So Internet NZ itself generally confines itself to dealing with issues of broad public policy interest, technical interest, and so on. So things like anti-spam or copyright infringement and so on. And it leaves the operation at .nz to its subsidiary organisations. So there's the Domain Name Commission Limited, or DNCL, or DNC, as you'll see occasionally in slides. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Internet NZ's, and it provides the policy and regulatory services for .nz. And then there's the New Zealand Registry Services Limited, NZRS, a wholly owned subsidiary that actually operates the register itself. And so there's a quick diagram. I think that looks okay. So Internet NZ holds the delegation of .nz, but doesn't actively run with it, and empowers its subsidiaries to actually run the policy and regulation and contract the registry services. So now, thinking about what multi-stakeholder might mean, I put this definition up in the other room earlier, but multi-stakeholder to me means the interested parties from government, business, the technical community and civil society participating on an equal basis. And really, really important to stress that equal aspect of it, that government has no special place. I mean, we all know and recognise that governments can make law that can require us to do things, but in the forum of establishing policies for .nz, we say government is an equal participant. And quite often we see tensions in some of the policies that we create between various government departments, particularly law enforcement versus privacy, and the mixed concerns that those 2 separate arms of government have. So anyway, that's the broad rule we work on. In terms of what governs a CCTLD, there are really only two recognised policies or sets of guidelines governing the operation of a CCTLD. Only two places we can turn to for guidance. One is RFC 1591, penned by John Postel in March 1994, and that provides some hard policies, including some hard public policy statements like it asserts that IANA does not decide what is or is not a country and merely relies on entries on the ISO 3166 two-letter country code list as to what constitutes a country or a CCTLD. And remember that wars have been fought over what constitutes a country and not, so these are quite important principles. And then there's the Government Advisory Council principles from ICANN from 2005, which are a set of guidelines. RFC 1591, I'm just going to go through some of the statements included in 1591 to explain what a CCTLD manager's obligations and requirements are. So firstly, a designated manager must be able to carry out the necessary responsibilities and have the ability to do an equitable, just, honest and competent job. So, quite important ethical considerations being asserted through this RFC. These designated authorities are trustees for the delegated domain and have a duty to serve the community. So this is not owning the community, but serving it. And the designated manager is a trustee of the top-level domain for both the nation and, in the case of a country code, and the global internet community. So again, a very valuable aspect that it's not just about what happens in your country and what your local laws dictate, but also your obligations to continue to be part of the end-to-end nature of the internet internationally. And really important to note that concerns about rights and ownership of domains, both at the top level and for the individual registrant, are actually inappropriate. But it's much more appropriate to be concerned about responsibilities in servicing the community, and that the designated manager must be equitable to all groups, i.e. the multi-stakeholder group, in the domain that requests domain names. And the final aspect of it, in cases where there are persistent problems with the proper operation of the domain, the delegation may be revoked and possibly redelegated to another designated manager. So in .nz, we take our obligations under RFC 1591 very, very seriously. And for .nz, we were delegated in the .nz space in 1995. We went through really 3 iterations of how to organise and manage it, and 2002 being our most recent revision of structure and process. In 2002, the Domain Name Commission established the overarching .nz policies. These policies are systematically reviewed and new policies are established on a needs basis when new things arise. And currently there is a major policy review on the second level policy for .nz. And I've left you there a couple of references. One is a list of all of the policies affecting the .nz domain name, and the second is specifically the second level proposal. And that's it from me. My email address is there if anyone wants to contact me afterwards. And I'll now hand over, unless there's any questions, I'll hand over to Debbie Monaghan, the Domain Name Commission, who would like to talk in more detail about policy setting in .nz. No questions? With that, the floor is yours.
Excellent, thanks Keith. And I think what Keith has done is actually illustrate that Internet NZ from its formation has taken a multi-stakeholder approach very seriously and is committed to actually the involvement of as many groups as possible in how we run .nz and other such things. So the Domain Name Commission, when it was established, picked up the same principles and operates in the same open way. This extends to open consultations. Also things like our board meetings are open to members of Internet NZ, and all the minutes of our board meetings are published. And what we actually do in respect of making sure the community is actually involved in our policy setting is all our, as I said, all our policy reviews and development is open. So we publish something on the website, we get submissions in, we publish all the submissions, then the board meeting, then when it discusses it, the decision is public. So everything's actually open. And to illustrate that, as Keith says, we've currently got a big consultation going on as to whether we should allow registrations at the second level. And this is quite a significant bit of work, but the general approach that we've used is exactly what we do for any other policy consultation. So we decide that we're going to do this big step and develop and write a consultation paper. This is published on our website, and the other service we have is for people who subscribe to it. We send an email out notifying people that there is a new consultation and setting out the parameters for that. The other thing we do is we actually proactively go out to organisations that we think might have a particular interest in that consultation. So, for example, when we got the application for a new second level domain of .health.nz, we went out to all the, we identified and then went out to all the organisations that had a health association. And there are over 3,500 organisations in New Zealand that actually have a health association. But for that particular one, all those people, organisations, got a specific letter from us, as per our usual group, which includes government departments, the law societies, the NZ-NOG, technical, non-technical, the wide group. For our latest consultation, we sent out in excess of 1,500 letters and a greater number of emails went out as well. So trying to get a wide range of input. We have an online submission form that people can go to, so we try to make it as easy as possible for people to make their views known. And then we publish all the submissions so that people can then comment on other submissions that might have been made. Now, what we then do is actually it goes to the board for a decision, and as I said, that decision is actually public so people can see how it actually progresses through the whole system. If need be, we might have a second consultation or set up a working group, but in essence, every step of the process is public and input is available for a wide range of people to put into. Now, one of the reasons for if you like me saying this and to actually talk is that this session is actually about getting your input. Because one of the issues we actually have is, though we try very hard, the level of submissions and comments we get is incredibly, incredibly low. Now, for our latest submission, consultation, we had some idea of how controversial it might be in that a month in we have already received 45 submissions, which is the greatest number we've ever received from any consultation we've ever done. Now, having said that though, given that what we're proposing is the potential to register .nz domain names directly at the second level, which is a major change that will have a significant impact on people, 45 submissions is still not long, still not many. And though what we're planning to do for this particular consultation as well, given its scale, is that we're going to be holding public meetings in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin, and online forum meeting to try and get as much input and ideas that we can. We're also produced a document, a publication that we're submitting to a wide range of trade magazines and others to try and get the message out. But even so, the question is how can we extend it to try and convince people that these topics are worth them thinking about and making a submission about, because it is important how the .nz domain name space actually functions. And the Domain Name Commission and Internet NZ is serious when we say that the views of everybody are important and that the views are taken equally right across. As Keith said, it's truly a multi-stakeholder model. And so the purpose for this is to get your thoughts, your ideas about what we can do better, and if people want to make specific comments about our latest consultation, they can feel free to do so as well. There'll be other mechanisms for doing that, but in essence it's your session to talk about how you would like to see us run .nz so you feel you've got a greater input into how we set and maintain our policy framework.
This is only to annoy Jeremy because he has to move the camera. Debbie, I have the domain name keith.co.nz, and so you're talking about collapsing .nz to the second level. So does that mean I automatically am qualified to get keith.nz? Because I feel that I have a proprietary right because I'm in .co. Can you explain to me what is being proposed? Am I going to lose on this? Yeah.
Actually, okay, Bruce is a domainer, so he's got a good stake in this, and it'd be interesting to get his views. Just briefly, in case people aren't aware, we had the date and time that this went open for consultation is what we call that point in time. If you had a domain name, a .nz domain name prior to that, then your name is subject to our Sunrise provisions. That means if you're the only one that had Keith at the third level, then you would get a chance to register keith.nz when or if this actually opens up. However, if multiple other people, somebody had keith.net.nz and another person had keith.org.nz, that's what we call a contested name. And either you agree who can get that name, or you agree that it should become a second level domain name in itself, or nobody gets it at all at the second level. So it's actually quite complicated, and if you haven't read the consultation paper, we actually give examples as to what different scenarios will have an impact on different people depending on what actually happens and what date the name was registered in. And there's no such thing as a stupid question, so if you read the document and you have questions, then email us and we'll answer them for you.
Okay, so Bruce can't now go and register Keith. I don't know, geek.nz, or if he does, he's not part of the process of being able to object.
That's right. And fortunately or unfortunately, I registered australia.gen.nz about 2 weeks before the cut-off date. So I can now block them if I chose to, if it goes through, which is, I haven't yet made my formal submission because, okay, I perhaps explain who I am and the like. I am the registrant of record of about 12 to 1300 .co.nz domain names, of which a bit over 100 are developed as websites, and as energy permits, I either create new websites or I get a little man somewhere in Asia, I don't know where, I give him $15 and he sends me back a website to my specs. I was at one point interested in trading in domain names, which turned out to not be one of my smartest ever moves. However, from a personal point of view, from a monetary point of view, if this .nz proposal goes through, I'm going ka-ching, 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 re-register, dump the .co.nzs, and I've got something marketable. From the point of view of the fact that we only have .nz and nothing else, and we're unlikely to ever get anything else, if at a later date there becomes a need for some new second level thing that becomes popular overseas, I've got no idea what. I mean, we couldn't have predicted when we set this all up that .iwi.nz, for example, would become an important issue and that the local iwi would want this reserved namespace for themselves. The moment we open .nz up to open registrations, anything that we can't predict that we need to reserve for future use will almost certainly become unavailable. Because, quite frankly, if it's a useful name, either someone like me will see it as a development opportunity, or some of my former competitors in the domain name ownership space will see it as marketable, and it will be gone. It's not hard to bulk register domain names if you see them as being useful, and I see a huge scramble, and I'm actually worried for the future of .nz. As I say, personally, if it goes through, I'll take the money and run. If it doesn't go through, I haven't lost anything I don't have at the moment. Reading through the 45 different, is it 45 already? Okay, I've read them all. I'm in droops and drabs. They seem to break down into two groups. The first are the people who say, I want, okay, personally, I have got clement.co.nz. I want it to be the clement.nz. My wife's got a business, sweetexpectations.co.nz. It's a bakery, in case anyone's wondering. And she'd like to have sweetexpectations.nz. So yes, we can see the point of view from business of grabbing that, or rather an I want. Other people have said, well, hang on, isn't this going to force people who've already got all the domain names they want to suddenly go and register new ones they don't want? And yeah, okay, there's a certain rebranding issue. You've got stationery, business cards, stuff written on the side of vans. You've built a lot of incoming links from directories and other things in. And are you going to abandon those, or are you suddenly going to have two domain names? Now, sure, You can say a domain name is, I believe, $15 wholesale at the moment, but it's really hard to find someone who will actually register your domain name for $15 plus GST, unless you've got the sort of quantities I've got. So you're up for an absolute minimum of another $25 per year per branding that you want to have on the internet. Then, of course, there's the point that once these things are gone, they're gone forever. And then there's the question that Keith started with, of, okay, I've got clement.co.nz, nobody else has registered clement.anything. So under the proposed rules, I'll be able to get it. I've got a web directory, searchnewzealand.co.nz, which I've had for 5-6 years now, I can't remember. Somebody, after I established this, registered the .net NZ on it. I've no idea who these people are. The name doesn't mean anything to me. It's always just been parked, and yet potentially, under the current proposals, that would block me moving my domain name. It's not that we're actually competing there. They're not doing anything. Now, you could take my 1,000 or something domains that are undeveloped at the moment and say, but aren't I doing that to other people? And possibly in some cases I am, but I've gone for generic names anyway, which is a whole different issue. The whole thing is it's fraught, and you can say, well, we're going to try and get consensus. I don't actually think we're going to get consensus. I think this is going to be bitter and acrimonious, and there's going to be people who take windfall profits out of it, and hopefully some of those will be mine. But, yeah, I'm really confused about it, and that's why I haven't written my comments yet. But I will do. And it will be just as long as all my others, Debbie.
Hi, Pete McCauley. Debbie, I think one of the issues around consultation has been pretty much the same with anything in this space, and it's more to do, I would suggest, from the outside now, that this is an indication of satisfaction with what you're doing, and the only people who are going to throw things into the ring are going to be people who have got fairly big issues. The rest of the people is virtually saying, hey, that's okay. If you want submissions say, hey, that's okay, then maybe you should go out and do that, and then you get more numbers.
My name's Dave Moskowitz. I'm an Internet New Zealand councillor. Don't mean to sort of change the topic of conversation. We can always come back to this. But can I just have a brief show of hands? How many people here are Internet New Zealand members? Right. Well, that's a really good count. As you know, the Internet New Zealand membership base is basically self-selected. There are 300 out of us, and my question I'd like to throw open to the floor around consultation is, what do you think John Postel meant by service to the community? And as an organization, as Internet New Zealand, how can we be better executing on that idea?
I'm just a little bit curious, because a lot of Internet New Zealand, you don't really see it when people are coming into the industry. So if you're being educated in the field or around a field that's surrounding this forum, it seems a little bit weird to only be able to find it after you've left and gone on your own search by yourself, really, rather than actually find, hey, being educated in it would probably be a little bit more, it would probably be a little bit more widespread to the new generation as much as the old one at that point as well. It's just...
I'll just go back to the question, what John Postel probably meant by servicing the local community. And of course, unfortunately, John died before he could explain all of the things that he had done. So it's a question of quite often interpreting. And in fact, currently I chair an ICANN, a working group that looks at aspects of delegations and redelegations of CCTLDs. And so our job is actually interpreting what was meant in RFC 1591. Fortunately, John wasn't wasn't the only person involved, and people like John Clenson and Becky Burr and others were. And Becky Burr is actually the vice chair of my working group, so I can rely on their judgment of what was intended and meant. And very much what was meant in that circumstance is that it is up to the local internet community to decide what is appropriate in those circumstances. Now, I think Internet NZ has always been very much at the most open level of interpretation of servicing the local internet community, and hence it explains its reasoning for the amount of outreach funding and so on that it does, as opposed to some CCTLDs who confine themselves very strictly to just doing what the CCTLD has to do, no more, no less, and so on. So, and there's no right or wrong in that. It's a question of what does suit the local community. And I think the important point here is that regardless of the fact that there might only be 2 or 3 responses to any consultation or normal consultations that Internet NZ does, it must be able to point to the open process and say, you had your opportunity, we tried to avail you of it. And I think that's what's quite important here too.
Just one random thought. Perhaps we're talking about the .nz namespace and the governance of it. Perhaps everyone who registers a .nz domain name should automatically be put on the newsletter list to receive information about consultations, because after all, any consultation that affects the .nz domain space potentially affects the registrants.
The way we try to do it is that the Domain Name Commission doesn't have a direct relationship with registrants. The relationship with registrants is actually with the registrar. So we will resist trying to go directly out and bypass the registrar, because the relationship is actually between those entities. But what we try to do is encourage the registrars to put information out to their clients. So we'll try and put wording that we think might be useful for them to actually send, which we send to the registrars. And so some registrars send out newsletters, and we'll see our text come back with our kind of consultation notes and that in there, but other times they actually won't.
Yeah, mic check. Kia ora tātou. Just a question on Māori and the domain names, and really going back to, thanks for your kōrero, Keith and Debbie, multi-stakeholder, government, business, technical community and civil society. And I'm conscious that Māori have a role to play in there, but people always assume we're part of those groups. But we're seeing in the Waitangi Tribunal yesterday, that Māori have a specific stake on water. Everyone else assumes we're all one people until half wants to sell, and then we want to keep our end. So when it comes to what I'm hearing, domain wars, that's how it's kind of triggering in my head. How do Māori fit with .iwi, or what's the future for us, and how do we better position, rather than scrapping it out in the courts?
I think there's definitely a large number of Māori groups that are on our consultation lists. .iwi is a moderated second level name, so you have to meet certain criteria to get a .iwi.nz domain name. .maori.nz of course is open for all registrations. So yeah, we deal with like Maori Internet Societies and Te Puni Kaukari and a wide range of iwi groups that we've actually had associations with. And it would be fair to say it was feedback from some of those that actually led us to introduce macrons into the .nz domain name space. We knew that wasn't going to be a commercial viability, and even now we have less than 200 IDN names, but the fact is that Maori, an official language of New Zealand, Maori are a key group in New Zealand, and when Maori indicated they wanted to be able to represent their language in .nz domain names, we implemented the 5 characters required to enable that to happen. So I think the thing is that did come about from our consultation, and we had representatives on our working group for that. And so I think the thing is to make sure that we keep going out, and that likewise the responses come in. But I think Internet NZ has shown through the .iwi, .maori, and the introduction of macrons that we are prepared to listen as well.
So what is the future?
Well,
It sounds complex with the .nz.
Well, I think the thing is that the consultation we're doing now, as Bruce actually said, it's an if. I mean, we're consulting now. We know that there's a divergence of views, and the submissions we've got so far are pretty much 50-50. So basically, I think it's like 23 for, and and 21 against, and various other such things, and 2 neutral, or whatever. And I think it's weighing up those differing views, and how we actually set that decision criteria is actually going to be quite a key thing. I don't know where that's going yet because we're still at the consultation phase. And one of the reasons for sessions like today and the future ones we're planning is what are people's views that they actually have. One of the reasons that we're doing this is because surveys we've done have shown that people's views have changed about how they view the structure of a domain name over the years. You've got more generic top-level domains coming in, and people in those register at the second level. You've got a number of countries where you register at the second level. Do we in .nz, are we happy with the status, and is this where we want to be in the future? Or do we take the opportunity now to look, well, this is where we are now, but this is what the future may or may not look like, and do we want to take steps towards possible change that might make it better for the future? So in essence, that's what this consultation paper is all about, is what do we want the future face or look of .nz to look like? And we want that broad range of views, because this is actually quite a significant decision, and we don't have the answers. So we're looking for what the local internet community considers from a wide range of groups. And to be fair, if you look at the ones who've given us submissions to date, we don't usually hear from the Ministry of Health or the Institute of Directors, and yet we've got submissions from them. So I think the thing is, by actually proactively going out and trying to seek that comment, some people for this one are actually listening. And so I'd just encourage you to go along to our online form and make your voice heard, because that's what we're doing all this for, is because we need the views to actually decide if we proceed, and if we do proceed, how that might look like, because all that we've put up is our proposal of how we might proceed. We actually haven't even set that in stone. So it could be that somebody says, oh yes, let's allow registrations at the second level, but instead of doing ABC, why don't you do DEF? And so we're open to alternatives as well. So Keith might put across to Keith, but .nz is the name that New Zealand's been allocated into the ISO list, which is what is linked to CCTLDs. So that is why basically 1 2-letter code per country, and New Zealand has .nz allocated to it.
Can I clarify this perhaps a little? There are 246 CCTLDs, country codes, 2-letter country codes, and .nz happens to be one. They are selected because of the ISO 3166, that's the International Standards Organisation 3166 2-letter country code list. Now, they don't align necessarily to countries, because not all, there are only 192 or 193 countries, but there's 246 CCTLDs, and that's it. So if you're suggesting .AO as an abbreviation for Aotearoa, that is the 2-letter country code for Angola in Africa. So it's not available for Maori use, except that you might go and talk to the registry operator and say, we could use this, and you're currently not using it. Would you like us to populate it with Maori names and pay fees for it? And you're freely entitled to do that. And there's been a lot of repurposing of some country codes, like .tv for television, or .nu, which means now in several Scandinavian languages and so on. So there is some repurposing, but also ICANN is currently going through a process of enabling a whole host of new top-level domains. So there's been 1,908 applications for new GTLDs, so everything from .eco, .gay, .kiwi, and so on. So there are alternatives that are not 2-letter codes emerging as well, and so you may be interested in applying for .maori or something like that in the future.
My name's Andy Linton. I'm one of the directors of the Dominion Commission. So when we get to the point where we're actually reaching these decisions based on the inputs, I just want to pick up, I'm one of the people who has to sort of work on that. I want to pick up something that Pete said about, you know, people being very happy with what we do and therefore not doing a submission. When we sit to make these decisions, we sit and have to make decisions on what's on the table in front of us. It's not our job to second guess the community. It's not our job to say, oh, well, we're pretty sure they, you know. So please, if you want us to have that input, don't assume that we will guess what you're thinking. You know, I don't really want to read thousands of submissions, but I would rather be doing that than trying to guess this on 40. You know, so if you have something to say on it, even if it's just, yes, I think it's a good idea, or no, I don't, I personally would love to hear that. I don't know that Laura will love me for saying that, but, you know, so that would be my call to you here.
Is this working? Yeah, my name's Frank March. I'm President of Internet New Zealand, but I also represent New Zealand on the Governmental Advisory Committee of ICANN, which no doubt Keith referred to in his 101 course earlier. Just picking up on the point about the flood of new strings that have been applied for, one of the things that the GAC, as the Governmental Advisory Committee is usually called, argued very, very strongly for in advising the board of ICANN was that there needed to be much more attention paid to community top-level domains. And I always had in mind that .Maori would be one such community application that perhaps the New Zealand government and Internet New Zealand would support. The problem is that the barriers to entry is enormous. You have to basically table, it's closed now, so it'd have to be wait for the second round of applications anyway. But the applicants had to table $185,000 US in order to get their names on in the queue. And that was simply, there's no way that, at least my guess is that .Maori would never be economical on that basis. It could never possibly reach that level. But it is something to keep in mind for the future, because governments who advise ICANN will be coming back to this point. We see enormous opportunities for community applications where there's very, very little contention, where the expense of applying at $185,000 US is simply utterly inappropriate, and that's definitely something to watch for the future.
My question is there's a process in this in these applications. The transparency for the intellectual property, can you give me a background on that before you make a decision for a domain name? Because if you're talking about Māori, or you're talking about my business even, and someone decides to shunt out a TLD with my business name on it, what's the process of actually viewing that and putting forward a submission for that intellectual property?
Right, .NZ in the open second levels operates on a first come first served basis, and there's no registration restrictions, so no checks are actually done. If a name is available, you can register a name.
So that's why it's $180,000.
Oh, you're talking about the GTLD?
Yeah.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about the new, so that's, because that cost is the GTLD level, and so basically that fits into the ICANN, how the ICANN process and model actually runs. And you can actually lodge an objection. So there is an objection process if you are unhappy. There's a number of different criteria for objecting. One is basically it's breaching intellectual property, others are government kind of other things. And so the thing is that, in fact, Cheryl might be good to talk to, because I was going to say the at-large group, which Cheryl was part of, actually have a key part in this whole process. So Cheryl, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Deb. Cheryl Langdon-Orr from Australia, we'll talk later. Let me assure you on two things. First of all, the objection, I'm going to step in the centre because I can. The objection process and for protection of your business, intellectual property and that sort of thing, within ICANN, one of the very important foundations of it is called the at-large community, and specifically the at-large advisory committee, which is an advisory committee to the board, but also works with GAC and other parts of the CCTLD community in ICANN. It has an operational role, ALAC has an operational role in the new GTLD program, which allows for community-based objections to the names. Okay? So 1,900 and sundry names are out there. Have a look at them. If you have an issue, then you actually have two at-large organisations in New Zealand that can bring your concerns or the concerns of your Aunt Mary, doesn't matter, directly to us. And there is a full and transparent process whereby if the concern is widely enough supported, so you don't get vexatious issues, we can actually act as an objector, which solves an awful lot of costs. So let me assure you on that. But just coming back to Frank's point on the 185 US and coming over to the opportunity on the second round for, what will actually be the next round for new GTLDs, we did, and ICANN supported a great deal of effort in what's called the applicant support program. Now, the applicant support program was very underutilised this round. Part of that was communications, part of that was, I think, particularly for what we thought was community, which was our preferred support group. They just weren't sure what new GTLDs might do for them. But what that would do, providing you are appropriately community-based and genuinely needy, we're not trying to get major brands helped here, is drop that initial cost down to 45. And there's a whole lot of other stuff there, including a set of people who are willing to help and assist. Intellectual property advice, legal advice, there's a whole section. If you're interested, there is a lot on the ICANN website, and I'd be more than happy to, I'm not that hard to find, but also I'm easy to, tweet to at CLO3, and we can give you the links. But that goes for all sorts of communities, not just .Maori. And really the next round should have a lot more of that. I think I've answered the questions. Thank you.
And if I could just comment on the point about objections. The GAC has also got a similar right of notifying the board on behalf of communities, but obviously more from a governmental perspective. But our experience is that there's likely to be quite a strong alliance and alignment between the ALAC issues and the issues that the GAC will be raising. So you're welcome to approach me directly. I'll, Keith, make sure that somehow or other my name is my official position. Yeah, and I'm actually formed a small group within government to look at the flood of applications from a New Zealand government perspective and whether we should be raising objections through the GAC to the ICANN board over any particular strings. So I'm very, very happy to hear from anybody who has concerns. I'm not guaranteeing that just because somebody objects to something that the New Zealand government will pick it up. Exactly as Cheryl said, there'll be a filtering process, but there will be a process to look at these issues from a New Zealand government perspective. It's got nothing very much to do with .NZ though.
So I have a question for both of you. What are the current rules and for moderation and for consensus that are operating? So if there is a conflict or if there is a current, basically a current cause to raise an issue of IP, what are the rules that go in place that you can put forward your consensus and say, right, now we can raise it up to ICANN or we can raise it to the GAC?
Email me, address on screen, and I'll send you the links. There's a very clear process. It's probably the easiest way. Can I bring the subject back to .nz? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. But I just want to bring us back to the subject in hand, which is actually .nz. We're sort of straying a bit. I mean, it's been an interesting conversation, but it's a bit off topic, I think, for what today was set for, which was a look at internal .nz policies. And Debbie, I noted a couple of months ago there was an application for a new second level .kiwi.nz, and so has now the process of potentially collapsing everything to the second level, has that suspended the .kiwi.nz debate, or is that ongoing as well?
We actually have a current policy, which is the second level domains policy, and that includes a process for people applying for a new second level domain, and that policy is still active. And so the application for .kiwi.nz was made under our current policy requirements and is going through the process like it would at any other point. What we're doing with registrations at the second level is a consultation only at this particular point. And the second level domains policy that we have is still active. It has not been terminated or anything. So if anyone in this room wanted to apply for a new second level domain, then that process is still there and it's free to do so. Well, it's not free. If you want a moderated second level domain application, it's $3,000. And if it's an open second level domain, it's $1,000, with the applicant getting $500 of that back if the name is subsequently created. So in actual fact, the .kiwi.nz application was made under our current existing policy, and it's proceeding through the system based on the process outlined and specified in that policy.
If I remember correctly, the last meeting of the DNCL board decided to pass it on to Internet New Zealand Council with their recommendations to proceed. Well, that was in the minutes I read the other day anyway. So in answer to where it is it's waiting for the Internet NZ Council to make a decision.
Yeah, the policy actually says that the Domain Name Commission Limited makes a recommendation to the next meeting of the Internet NZ Council, and that next meeting is towards the end of August. So the Domain Name Commission Limited board will be writing a paper, and yes, as the minutes pointed out, which Bruce's point, the recommendation will be going that it should be accepted and .kiwi.nz created as a second level domain. It's because it hasn't been written yet.
Come on, fight your buggers.
Can I just make one comment before Keith finishes off, and that is that at any time, if anyone has any ideas or anything that you feel we need to address for any .nz policy, just email info@dnc.org.nz at any point. It doesn't need to be specifically linked to a consultation. If somebody wants an issue, they want us to consider a policy aspect, then basically you can do that at any time, and our policies actually say that you can do that at any time. So please stay involved.
Oh, yeah, just to mention to people, if you don't like the fact that someone's registered your trademark as a domain name in the .nz space, you don't have to go around and kick their kneecaps. You can actually raise a disputes process, which is very fairly handled by this lady here.
Keith, did you want that? Do you want that? Thank you.
Okay, any final last question?
This goes back to the point that you raised before, and I believe somebody else also spoke to, and that is the new global top-level domains. Sorry, that's next session. Okay, but just think before next session and answer then, is should Internet New Zealand be helping Maori establish a new global top-level domain outside of .nz, presumably financial or consulting-wise or whatever? Because I think it's a question that Internet New Zealand, as a charity looking after the good of Internet New Zealand for all New Zealanders, has to actually consider that the Maori is an individual stakeholder. That has to be, thank you.
that was going to be my one of my concluding points here. I think just as a reminder to everyone that somewhere in the lobby area is the board for putting up issues to be discussed on Friday at the bar camp, and so this very much could be an issue to discuss, the concept of .Maori or .Pacific or other sort of local and indigenous uses of the GTLD space might be a really interesting topic to put on that board and actually have a dedicated several-hour session on Friday to discuss. So, or any other topic that arises. So if you're passionate about the collapsing of .nz to the second level and concerned as I am as keith.co.nz and whether I can have keith.nz, then you could have a session on that as well. So have a think about that during the next couple of days, and if there are topics that are obviously worthy of further discussion, put them up on the board and hopefully they'll be attended to. Other than that, I think it just remains for me to thank Debbie for being so open and available and multi-stakeholder in her approach, and all of you for your questions today. And I hope this has been a helpful session to furthering your own knowledge about the .nz domain name. Thank you all very much, and we're closing 5 minutes early. Thank you.